Good morning, welcome. My name is John Van Etten. I'm the Managing Director of Human Synergistics office in Germany. Human Synergistics is the organization responsible for instruments such as the Organizational Culture Inventory, Leadership Impact, and the LSI. These tools are used by consultants and organizations for individual leadership, team, and organizational development. So I'm very happy to be joined today by Mr. Guy Kempfert, the director and founder of Culture Works in Switzerland. I've had the pleasure of collaborating with Mr. Kempfert on leadership, team, and organizational development culture projects for the last 7 years in a variety of settings. So really looking forward to having the chance to discuss and pick your brain about best practices for implementing culture change. Thank you so much for joining us, Guy.
Okay, thank you, John, for inviting me, and hello to everyone. So I've been doing culture change or change management for a couple of years, and every time I do it, it's different. And the intention is not to download my PowerPoint presentation to you, but I just would like to share some ideas, some of the things that I have found useful, some of the things that I think usually work, but it's no, there is no silver bullet for implementation of culture or culture change, not at all. And okay, that's fine. So, and what I would also very much like, would appreciate from everybody who has tuned in is their comments, their questions. So I'd like this to, after my short presentation, to turn into a discussion. And hopefully I can now share a presentation with you. Let's see if this works. If you can all see it, hopefully. Good. Now, this is what everyone says. Culture is our greatest strength. And whenever and you see this in quite a lot of ads where they're looking for somebody who takes care of the culture, because CEOs have now discovered that what Peter Drucker once said is really true, that they want a culture, but very often they have no clue what this is all about. But they know that somehow culture is very important, and whatever they do, they need to have the right culture in place. So what usually people do is they call a consultant, because what is evident, a constructive culture helps a lot. If you manage to achieve what we at Human Synergistics call a constructive culture, then you can find a much higher motivation among the people. And that goes along with higher engagement, because if people are motivated, they are engaged, they stay longer, they stay there, they don't leave. And such an organization also attracts people, because now people, when they go through the recruiting process, they ask different questions. So my daughter works in HR, and what she told me yesterday was that younger people particularly, they want to know something about the culture. They want to know something about the purpose of an organization. They have questions, they have demands. They don't want to work for just anyone. So you got to have something to offer to not only these people, but also to the people who already work for you. If you work in a constructive culture, the well-being of people increases. Whereas if you work in a toxic culture where you have a lot of competition, where you have a lot of passive aggressive culture, people tend to become ill. They tend to retreat. They tend to try to avoid the issues. But whereas if you have a constructive culture, people can open up because there's a high level of trust. High level of trust meaning that people dare to open up, they dare to speak up, they dare to come up with innovative ideas, which might even fail sometimes, but they're not afraid of failures because they know there's a trustful environment where they can try out things, and even if they make a mistake, this is going to be discussed and they learn from it. Okay, so there's a completely different collaboration. You don't hide from other people, but you share your ideas and you learn from others. And so that's the environment where innovation, which is conducive to innovation. And innovation involves risks. If you don't risk anything, you will never have an innovation. But people who tend to live in a passive aggressive or openly aggressive atmosphere, they don't come up with innovation. They don't come up with new ideas because they know they're going to be criticized, or it might even fail. So that leads to high performance. It's simply, it's relatively easy. That's the way to do it. Okay, and that's what a lot of people, a lot of CEOs, a lot of board members aspire to do. But the question is, how do you get there? And this is what I'm going to show you right now. Now, first of all, if you start working in a company, you should always be aware that a company, that you need to work on 3 different, very critical dimensions. And you need to work on these 3 dimensions all the time. So you need to work on and with individuals. That's the I. And organizations are made up of teams. So you need also to address the we is level, and the IT is not the IT, but it's it. So that's the organization. And what does it mean in particular? So the I mean, you have lots and lots of individuals in a company. They have their own mindset, they have their own mental model, they have their own personality, they have different behaviors, self-awareness, etc., etc. And they come together with lots of other people. And so the first difficulty is, how are they working together? So how do they collaborate? What are the shared values? How do they communicate? How do they conduct meetings? What's the level of trust? What can you do in order to increase the level of trust? And finally, whatever you do in a company, there's the strategy, there are structures and processes and policies and rituals, etc., etc. So I'll give you an example. If you work on innovation, okay, you start working with individuals and you encourage them to, for instance, take risks, or you do design thinking, whatever you do with them. You may even do that in their team, which is already a bit more difficult. But if, of course, the policies and the processes, okay, prohibit risk-taking, and you are punished for risk-taking, then innovation won't fly. That's what I mean by you have to work on all the 3 dimensions all the time. So whenever you do something, make sure that whatever you do is aligned with the 2 other dimensions. I mean, if you have any questions, just ask me. Okay, so from my long and hard experience with change and culture change, here are some of the things that have worked for me. And I mean, some of them sound like textbooks, but never mind. I mean, other people have thought about the same thing, have come to similar conclusions. So again, keep the 3 dimensions in mind. The first thing is self-explaining, more or less. So all you have to do is getting clarity on the goal. So what is it that they want to achieve, and are they all behind it? So if they're not behind it, don't do it. And I know this sounds trivial, but as a matter of fact, a lot of people that I meet, in particular CEOs, are very, very ambitious and have no time and no patience. For them, the goal is clear: go and get this done quickly and leave me alone, or just do it. Okay, and they hardly ever sit down and discuss the goal and all the repercussions of the goal and get the commitment of the top leadership. They think it's okay. We all agree. We're all aligned. We are always aligned. But this is a myth. And very often consultants fall into the trap because we want the work, of course, and we're happy if the CEO calls us and we just get going. And this has happened to me. I mean, it might happen again that I'm overwhelmed by one of these very, very charismatic and quick CEOs who just tell me, look, this is what we're going to do. You're the right man. You're going to do this. Okay. Any questions? Good. Go and talk with my people. And then I'm flabbergasted and I think, oh my God, I should have asked more. So that's something we should all have in mind and should all be aware of. Whenever you do anything, whenever you coach, get clarity on the goal. Ask back, ask again, ask them, what is it that you want to achieve? What is the benefit? What is then possible? What is better afterwards? Visualize the goal for me. Just take your time. What is it that you want to achieve? It's not just culture. It's more than just culture. What is it exactly? Okay. Secondly, communication. So whatever the goal is, the goal must be communicated, must be shared. The rationale must be understood by the organization. And that should be done by the CEO and its leader and its leadership team, but in a compelling way. It's no use sending a very busy PowerPoint presentation and putting it on the website. Nobody will read it. Nobody will understand it. It's just another hype that people will be confronted with. But if you manage to tell something, to tell it, emotional storytelling, this is what people want to hear. And this is something we have to teach the CEOs and their leadership, because they are not capable of inspiring people with a good story, because a good story comes from your heart and shows the way. A good story tells the people, this is what we are, this is how we are, and that's the good thing about us. This is the challenge. This is, the danger we're faced with. And this is the opportunity. And here's what we can do. And if we manage to do that, if we weather the storm, this is in for it. And this is what the future can look like. And this is why we're doing this. But that's completely different from, here are the statistics, here are the figures, here's the EBIT margin, and here's the net profit loss. Nobody is inspired by that. If I talk too much, tell me. Ideally, if you can do that, do a culture assessment. And the OCI is a fantastic tool to do it, because everybody is involved at the very beginning. Everybody sees, something is going to happen, okay? And you can do the OCI current and the OCI ideal and compare it. And then everybody sees, okay, this is what we all said. So evidently there's some truth in it. Let's work on the gaps. Let's prioritize the gaps. Let's see what we can do. Sometimes organizations do it later, but ideally it's, of course, if you start at it, because then you always have a point of reference. So I'm just doing this in an organization in Austria. They do exactly that. So they involve everyone. This is a very mixed, very diverse group, but it helps to align them on goals they all commonly commit to. Then you work on the leadership, because they communicate everything to their people, and leadership has a huge influence on the climate, on the performance of, that's the way a leader leads, the style of the leader determines the outcome to a great extent of his or her team. So it's the way a leader communicates, a leader behaves, because it's the perception of the leaders, which is reality for most of the people. And if the CEO aspires to certain goals and to certain cultural values, but doesn't role model what he or she is talking, then you can just about forget it. Okay, so I was working in a company where the CEO was the strong advocate, supporter of the culture change, and he wanted everybody to become very constructive, but at the same time he was yelling at his people. So whenever we had a workshop, they said to me, "But what about him?" And so it was not. It was very difficult, and it was not convincing and not authentic. So people didn't buy it, and that's why it failed. Something that very often gets forgotten in this whole euphoria of culture change, which is usually created at the beginning. You have to have some kind of governance, some kind of rules, and you should also have somebody taking over responsibility. So there should be somebody who is really fully dedicated to the change. And it's not somebody who does it on top of whatever he or she is doing. So I know this costs a bit of money, but if you have somebody who's well known in the company, and he or she doesn't have to do it alone, but he or she cares and is responsible for the change, and he's the person to go to. And he or she is also the one who comes up with initiatives, ideas, and ideally reports then to the CEO. And I said start at the very top, which is vital. And sometimes we manage to also, at the same time, next to the top-down approach, we also establish a bottom-up approach. So that could mean you ask influential people who might be critical, but on the whole positive towards the change, and they can act as change ambassadors, as catalysts, as culture change agents. You can call them whatever you like, but they, of course, also have a high degree of credibility, because they come from the bottom, and they believe in it, and they have a different approach to their peers than leaders have. And if you align the top-down with the bottom-up approach, the likelihood of sustainable success of the change is very high. Okay, yeah. And don't delegate it to HR. I mean, I have nothing against HR. I worked in HR all my life. I love HR. It's the most important part of the business, but very often it is seen as a non-profitable, not necessary HR thing, and they have no clue about the business. So if you manage to get business people involved in the steering committee or taking over some of the leadership part in the culture change, then the credibility is even higher. It's all about the credibility. Does the company really want it? Do they see that culture is very important for the well-being and the survival of the company? Yeah, that's what I said. It's not enough to just do workshops with individuals or with teams. Always think about all the three dimensions. And who would have thought that? It takes time. That's something people sometimes have difficulties to understand, because when you tell a CEO, that's a great thing, and I need resources. Then he might say, fine, we have some money dedicated and put aside. And if you then tell him or her, it might take 5 years, then he might go through the roof, because 5 years in the eyes of a CEO is a lifetime. And they have a short-term view. They might be very clever and intelligent and see the difficulties, but that's something they should know up front. It will take time. It may also go down and up, and there is no linear way, approach to, there's no given success road. The road might be slippery. There might be dead ends. You might turn around. And so it will take time, and the time is needed. Yeah, that's what I just said, so I can skip that. Yeah, and then of course, if you change something, what you want to do in the end is help people change their behavior. And a constructive culture, constructive behavior requires that people, for instance, give each other feedback, that they are able to have difficult conversations, that they are able to do certain things, that they develop emotional intelligence, see things from different perspectives, etc., etc. So again, that costs money. So, you know, and so I had one company where, and they're still going on this way, and they put aside resources for all the people in the organization to at least spend 2.5 days on a culture workshop where they could discuss their behavior, where they were given tools to analyze and change and reflect on their behavior, where they were given certain skills like feedback, difficult conversations, etc. So they could then apply these skills in their teams, which helped that. And it took time. It took several years, and they are now into their 6th year, and they still go on, and they have a huge performance. So they're outperforming all their competitors, and they firmly believe that this has to do with their constructive culture. Yeah. From time to time, you have to have some KPIs. So for instance, what's the retention rate? What's the motivation? What's the engagement level? What's the recruitment success? Blah, blah, blah. So from time to time, you should measure whether you're still on track, and always communicate. I mean, communication is a biggie in all organizations. Whenever you ask anyone, they will say, communication is bad. We don't know what's going on. But you can ask. I mean, I have never ever worked in an organization where people said, "Oh no, we know everything. We're well informed. Everything's fine." So, but communication doesn't mean that you just put everything on the website. Communicate personally. Use different communication approaches, but make sure that whatever you do is communicated, not over communicated, because then they all of a sudden they are saturated, they are flooded, and they have enough, they don't want to hear it anymore. Yeah, here's one thing. In my experience, my view, it's better not to call it culture change. Question is why? When we had this culture change at one of the companies, we called it the culture journey. And so we had a big issue because people thought that their culture is bad. But they had been working in that company for 10, 20 years. And so they were proud of their culture, what they had achieved. And now we came and said, oh, no, forget it. We're going to change the culture. Now it's going to be better. Okay. And that led to quite a frustration among the people. So it's better to focus. And I go back to the first bullet point. When you get clarity on the goal, ask, what exactly do you mean by the culture? Is it better communication? Is it better collaboration? Is it innovation? Is it customer orientation? Whatever it is, name it and focus on that. And I give you an example. If you, for instance, say, okay, we're going to work on customer orientation, then you might think it's not a big thing, okay? But if you do this well and cascade it down, it will require a change in your mindset, because it's not just external customer, it's internal customer. You will, in the end, apply a different approach to your work. And by doing that, you will have changed a bit of your mindset. And that also means you will have changed the culture. And from there, you can move on to the next things, okay? This is equal to your personal change. You don't change everything. But if you, for instance, as a leader, decide, I want to become a better leader. Well, okay, fine. I have lots of leaders that I coach, and we start with just one little thing. For instance, most of them can't listen. And I tell them, okay, let's start listening to your people, listening in a non-judgmental way. And if you do that well, you will change your attitude towards your people, because all of a sudden you realize they are people and they might have something interesting and beneficial for me to say. Instead of, I know it all and I'm bored by them and they steal my time. So by just starting to listen, you change your attitude and you change your mindset. And the same applies to culture change. Start with one thing. Okay, there are some watch outs. Leadership behavior comes top. So perception is reality. Leaders, as Simon Sinek said, eat last. So they need to absolutely role model whatever they aspire to. And you as a consultant, you have the license to address it. If you watch people not role modeling, I think we need to tell them what the impact of not role modeling is, because then, I mean, people just see you do it and they shrink away and then they're gone. Yeah, if nothing happens, if nothing changes, then people will lose faith in the change. If there's no institutionalized responsibility, then nobody knows who is responsible. And change, or any project, any initiative, needs someone who takes responsibility. If there is no one responsible, nobody will do it. It's a very simple rule. I told you, it's got to be owned by the business, and you need to have supportive measures, processes. That's what I meant by the 3 dimensions. There might be a witch hunt. What do I mean by witch hunt? Okay, now the company said we're going on this culture journey, and we aspire to have a constructive culture. Now, I once had a CEO who came to us and said, I want a list of the people who refuse to go to the workshops. And we said, we're not going to give you the list. And he yelled at us and said, I want you. I need to know. I'm the CEO. I need to know everything. And we said, no. I mean, you know what's going to happen. And he also said, I want to have feedback from all the workshops that you do. We said, that's fine, you get a feedback. And I want you to point out those who perform really well in the workshop. And I also want you to identify the people who didn't do well, who didn't really believe in the change. And I want you to tell me their names. Imagine what will happen if you follow and you do that. You give one name, the CEO goes to this person, and then you forget the whole culture journey, because the word will spread around in a second. and everybody will be very, very cautious from then on. Or you'll become dogmatic. This is the only way. Okay, this is it, and you all have to do it like this. This is a difficult thing, because of course we all believe that the new culture, the aspired goal, is much better, and we have difficulties understanding that other people see it differently. So there's a very fine, a very subtle balance between aspiring and working towards the goal, whilst at the same time accepting that people have different views. So it's much, much better to work on the assumption that people will be convinced once they see the benefits. And that's also why it takes a bit longer. Some people take longer. They sit on the fence and they watch, they observe. But if you force them to do it, they might just do it, but they won't believe it. Okay, summarize the top 4 principles of successful culture change. The CEO, without the CEO, don't even sign the contract. Likewise, the CEO's leadership team, they have to follow suit as well. And the goal is clear, and you have somebody who takes overall responsibility. These are my 4, but all the other points that I mentioned are at least equally important, but I think these are the ones that you should always keep in mind. That's it.
So that's fantastic.
We'll see.
Thank you,
It took me much longer than I expected. I'm very sorry.
No, not a bit. Thank you for putting the time into it. It's years of experience and insights. So thank you so much for sharing them.